বিষয় দুর্জন সদা কামরত কিছু নাহি মোর গুণ অভিমান।
Hare Krishna, I'm Nandi Mukhi, and I'm one of the devotees who serve here at 2nd Avenue. And we just had a festival, so the storefront looks a little much like a warehouse today, but we'll give you a tour just the same. It's only 500 square feet, and the surfaces have all been changed. Ceiling has been replaced with an acoustical tile. The floor has been replaced because there was a rotten spot forward near the asana there. And all the walls have been redone because they were crumbling. This served as a warehouse, a storage room for an antique store for 12 years. And it went to great disrepair, but we've been trying to put it back in some shape or other.
And the walls were what before?
The walls were plaster on brick, and the plaster just crumbled. The bare brick was showing. It was in very bad repair. So it looks presentable now because we use it as a preaching center, and we also have a few touches to bring out the tirtha mood of the place. Old photographs. These on the wall here, this is Prabhupada and Brahmananda exiting from the back apartment, his apartment in the rear, crossing the courtyard, ready to come in for an evening program. This is the sign posting classes, evening classes. And the bottom pictures of several guests entering for the classes. This is a picture of a wedding. This is Gargamuni's wedding. Jadharani is dancing behind him. You can see the light in the front door in back of the devotees. This is Prabhupada seated, I believe, on the Bowery. And Prabhupada in Tompkins Square Park. This is Prabhupada. This is the only picture showing Prabhupada outside of 2nd Avenue here. This is in San Francisco at the airport. Famous photo. Again, Tompkins Square Park. Tompkins Square Park, this is Brahmananda. And I don't know exactly who else is dancing with him. We had a kirtan just the other day. Many, many devotees in Tompkins Square Park. It's part of World Harinam Day. This is Prabhupada giving his obeisances. I believe this is either here in the temple room or in his apartment in the back. I can't tell exactly. These are clips from the old Happiness at 2nd Avenue video. And this is Prabhupada walking around the East Village alone. What a sight that would have been. And this is Prabhupada seated between these two windows under another Radha Krishna painting, a little later actually than this one. And the curtains over the windows, they had an interesting way of decorating the storefront just to make it look a little more exotic. And again, this is probably the same evening, Prabhupada giving class. And again, I think this is either in the storefront or his apartment. I think it must be, I don't know which, actually. And so these are old paintings that were painted in 66 and 67 by Indira. This is by Indira. And Jadharani. These are one by Jadharani, another by Jadharani. And this is one of the earliest ones that Prabhupada had Jadharani paint. This was painted from a photograph, and there's a photograph of Prabhupada looking at the painting. And the photograph back there, you'll see the very same painting hanging in the very same spot. So that's an accurate location. This is another one by Jadharani. And this is by Indira. All 66 and 67. All painted here. Now we're going to go through the door that Prabhupada would enter when he would come for his morning and evening programs. This door, he would come through from his apartment in the back, and we'll go through to the courtyard and show you where the apartment is. This is a famous courtyard. These three windows are Prabhupada's apartment. The window on the fire escape right here in the first floor up was the kitchen. And these two rooms were his front room. And some of the same people living in the building at that time are living here now. Prabhupada would come through that door, cross the courtyard. We saw the photograph of Brahmananda and he coming through that door, crossing this courtyard, through this door, and entering the door into the temple room. There's a very famous picture of Prabhupada standing next to a bird bath and a bird feeder, and that was taken against this wall.
This all took place in 1966, in late May or June, early June. Prabhupada had been having some difficulties in the Bowery. He wasn't able to function the way he had wanted. And there was like a pressure on me to help do something to get him a better place. Of course, many of you know the story from the Prabhupada Lilamrita. But basically what happened is I felt that it was time for me to try to help, and I didn't know exactly how or what to do. So I went down to the Village Voice office, and right across from the Village Voice office was a little candy store. And I think it was a Wednesday, one day a week, when the Village Voice came out once a week, this candy store would have the Village Voice there right hot off the press. It was the first place you could get the Village Voice. I knew that because I used to look for apartments in the area and lofts and places to live. So I got there bright and early, and as soon as the papers were delivered, I started looking for some kind of a place that might be suitable. Prabhupada's place was up in a loft on the Bowery, and it was very difficult to access. So I thought, all right, a ground floor place would be really good. So I just was going down the column, and it was either the first or maybe the second place that I called was this address, and it was a storefront for rent, 26 2nd Avenue. So I phoned, talked to the agent named Mr. Gardner, and straight away made an appointment to meet him, thinking that Srila Prabhupada would come and we'd have a look at it and see if it would be suitable. So that's actually what happened. We made arrangements to meet, and I got here a little bit earlier than Prabhupada, and he also came with another devotee, Karlapati. It was Carl Jurgens then. So I came early, and Mr. Gardner came. He was kind of a very sprightly looking youngish man. He was wearing tennis shoes and denims and a t-shirt, and kind of good natured. So we had a little chat, and I told him about Prabhupada, that he was a scholar, that he was an author, that he was a spiritual leader, that he had given books that he had written to the Prime Minister of India and so on. So he was quite impressed. He liked the idea. He liked the idea of somebody like that having the opportunity to rent this storefront. So then Prabhupada came along with Carl. They were walking this way up 26 2nd Avenue, and then we all made introductions. Then we came into this storefront and sat on that ledge just inside the window and had a discussion. I think there was one chair maybe, and I remember sitting in that ledge, and the discussion was, could we rent this place? So Prabhupada had some very interesting things to say, but we did most of the talking. And the rent was $100 a month. And in the course of the conversation, I think he brought it up, that there was an apartment available also in the same building through the courtyard on the other side, and that would be available for $80 a month. So we began to talk, and the whole thing sounded like, Prabhupada looked like this would be a suitable place, it would be accessible. So we had to have a little powwow right in front of Prabhupada and Mr. Gardner how we would pay the rent. So we just sort of said between us, Carl and I, that somehow we would pay the rent. Don't worry, it's not a problem. 100 plus 80. And Mr. Gardner said that he would paint this building, this flat, this apartment. He would repaint it white before, and that would take a few days. But then we would be ready because the storefront was available, and the apartment was available, and that he could move in and start giving his classes. We kind of told him what was going to happen here, not in detail. We didn't talk about big harinams and mridangas and kartals, but that it would be yoga classes. So at some point during the conversation, Prabhupada said that Mr. Carl, he used to call us by our first names with Mr. appended at the front end, Mr. Michael, they're members, they're trustees of our society. And then we got talking, a little more talking, and Prabhupada had his set of Bhagavatams, the 3 Bhagavatam, the first canto, parts 1, 2, and 3. And he actually presented them to Mr. Gardner, and he was a little, no, please take them. And Prabhupada signed them. And then the conversation, and he was very kind of humbled by getting these books. He said, "Oh, thank you, it's very kind of you." That was quite a substantial gift for someone to get. And Prabhupada, of course, had that presence of being a very transcendental personality. He wasn't an ordinary person, wearing his saffron and being very distinguished. So he took it as an honor. And then he began to talk more about how we were members of this society. So then he asked Mr. Gardner, he said, and we would also like you to be a trustee of our society. So he thought for a minute, and he kind of looked at the books, and he said, "Yeah, okay." So we talked a little bit more about what Prabhupada was doing and how the movement was expanding and how he liked America. And then he went on to say that Mr. Carl and Mr. Michael, they're trustees, and as all the trustees do, they pay a subscription of $20 a month. And we'd like you to participate in this way too. And he hesitated for a moment, but then he agreed. And of course, and then Prabhupada said, of course, it'll be easier for you if you just deduct it from the rent rather than have to pay it. So we immediately got a $20 discount on the rent. And I really can't remember whether it was 120 or 100, but he took it off immediately. And he was a little bit taken aback, but he kind of knew that was the deal. And by the time all was said and done, he was in very good spirits.
Now, I noticed one thing. I just noticed that the sink is not there. So that sink was very important. There used to be a sink right there. Prabhupada used to sit right here on the platform because when Prabhupada would cut the apple after the kirtan, then he would not core it or would not skin it, just slice it. And then it would be passed around. And he would also take one. And he would just put it in and chew. And then somehow he was able to separate the core and the skin and so on. And then he would lean back and just spit the whole thing right into the sink. And everyone said, "Wow." No one did that. So that sink is not there. They should put a sign. This is the sink which Prabhupada used, as like a spittoon.
Before Prabhupada moved in, he asked me to go down to Con Edison and see if he could get the lights and whatever else Con Edison supplied then for free, because it was a charitable organization, not a commercial venture. So I toddled on down to Con Edison office and explained that we're going to rent this storefront and our Swami is going to rent an apartment, and because it's a charitable organization, we'd like to have it get the deposit waived. That's what Prabhupada actually wanted, because there was for us, a substantial deposit required. So I was kind of like talking to a brick wall. I just, I say, we don't make those kind of arrangements. You just have to pay like everybody else. You have to pay a deposit for the apartment and the storefront. So I wasn't a very daring and active devotee in those days. Not that I am now, but I really just, okay, well, that's the system, that's the way it is. So when I reported this back to Prabhupada, he wasn't very happy at all. It's like, hey, you know, what's wrong with you? That was the feeling. So what eventually happened was Prabhupada went down there himself, at least so I was told, and somehow convinced them to waive the deposits on the utilities in this building for these two places. Then when things started happening here in 26 Second Avenue, in a very short time, extremely short time from my view, over a period of maybe 1 or 2 weeks, this very dingy place was completely transformed. Carpets were brought in, tapestries, paintings were hung on the wall, and it was filled up within a matter of days with people. And one of them, of course, was Allen Ginsberg, who everyone was, wow, Allen Ginsberg's here, you know, it's big time. And it inspired everybody to come more and to take part, and to take part in the kirtans. And I know that Prabhupada would be extremely proud and thrilled, actually. I know he is, to see us here today, and to see all this wonderful memorabilia on the walls, to see how it's been so nicely renovated, and to preserve, and how it's preserving the beginnings of Krishna consciousness, really the beginnings of Krishna consciousness spreading outside of India.
One day I was going to work. I would go every day to work to New York City, a Board of Education, and one day I saw there was a newspaper just lying there in the subway. I wasn't reading I'd stopped reading the newspapers. There was a New York Times, and there was a picture of Dr. Radhakrishnan. And I just snatched it up. I started reading, and it was Dr. Radhakrishnan retires. He was the president of India. And I ran back to the temple with it to show to Prabhupada, because Prabhupada had been telling us all about Dr. Radhakrishnan. He had so much contact with him, and he had asked him to join in this movement. And Dr. Radhakrishnan was the Pakka Mayavadi, the deluded scholar, who said not to Krishna, the unborn within Krishna. And Prabhupada said so many things. And but Prabhupada had told us that he had invited Dr. Radhakrishnan to preach Krishna consciousness. And Dr. Radhakrishnan told Prabhupada, when I retire, then I will do it. And here I am riding on the subway to New York in my job, and there's a newspaper right staring me in the face, Dr. Radhakrishnan retires. So I took the article, and Prabhupada wrote him a letter inviting him to take up Krishna consciousness. And but whatever happened, nothing came of that. But then later, when Prabhupada went to India on his tour of South India, he went to see Dr. Radhakrishnan. And you know the story, how he was incapacitated and so on. You know that he had gotten a stroke, and he couldn't even speak. He was paralyzed. And Prabhupada said, because he cannot speak because he is Mayavad. This is what Krishna has. He spoke so much nonsense, and now he cannot speak.
This was like a standard Sunday feast menu. There'd be there'd be at least a couple of different kinds of rice, pushpanna and white rice, and maybe at least 2 or 3 different kinds of rice. They'd have a wet sabji and a dry sabji at least. There would be very often that cauliflower and potatoes in wet, which, as Prabhupada taught, and always samosas, and samosas meant cauliflower and pea samosas, cooked dry only, cooked dry and spicy. And pakoras, there'd be at least a couple of different kinds of pakoras, and they'd have puris, white puris, those, what are they called, luchis, and there'd be, halab, we haven't gotten that far. Then there'd be different kinds of, like, save, noodles and things like that, and a few different kinds of chutneys, like a plum chutney and an apple chutney and a raisin chutney and a pineapple chutney. There'd be 2 or 3 different kinds of chutneys. And then there'd be different kinds of sweets, simply wonderfuls, halava, sweet rice always, always, and gulab jamuns. Yeah, people were jolly, yeah. Yeah, no wonder people, I mean, you'd have to be nuts not to join. Yeah, this was the Sunday feast. It was not a small thing. And at one point, actually, I remember many years later, there were, book distribution was a big thing, and Prabhupada said that, they could leave 1 packet person back at the temple. And some place the managers started getting the idea that the feast should be cut down and they should have like 4 preparations or 5 preparations so that like 1 person could do it and everybody else could go out and distribute books. And Prabhupada wrote a very specific letter about that and said, no, it should be opulent. And it shouldn't be, just 1 or 2 or 3 things 1 person could do, but our feast program should go on full strength.
I made a big decision to join the community. And at that time, in those days, some of us, like Mukunda and Malati and others, if there was a boy-girl relationship, boy and girl were living together, so Prabhupada asked that you should get married. So I was living with someone, and so we discussed a lot, and we saw the wedding ceremony of Subal and Krishna Devi. So we said, we want to join this community. And so we went to Prabhupada and we said, Swamiji, we'd like to join your community. And of course I thought there must be some formality. I said, went to the devotees, I said, we'd like to go and speak to Swamiji. What's the, what should we do? They said, oh, just go up, he's on the 5th floor. I said, but is there like some formality? Should I, I thought I should make an application or something like this. He said, no, he's in 512. He said, Ranchor was his servant then. Ranchor will just, answer the door, and then you just say you want to see Swamiji. That's all I have to do. Yeah, go ahead. And so then I went up, and we did that, and sure enough, Ranchor answered the door, and we said, we'd like to see Swamiji. And he said, yes, come in, and I was so shocked that actually this was the truth. I thought, there must be more. So then we walked in, and we knew we'd been to the temple many times, but, we just didn't have our senses, and Prabhupada was sitting there, and he said, please take your shoes. And oh yes, so we took ran back to the door and took our shoes off, and then sat down, and Prabhupada said, yes, you want something? And so I said, Swamiji, we'd like to join your group and be married. And Prabhupada said, first you have to be initiated. Oh yes, I want to be initiated then, because I had no idea that this is the procedure. He said, so you like our philosophy? And then he recognized me that I was attending regularly in the classes, and so you like our philosophy? Yes. And he said, and he looked at me a little, and he said, so you have a job? Because many people were coming and they just they weren't working and that kind of thing. So somehow or other I managed to be a little bit different from some of the others, and I actually had a job at that time. So I said, yes, Prabhupada, yes, Swamiji, and I pointed outside. I used to do this lineman work. I said, I climbed those poles there. So Prabhupada said, very good. Then he then agreed to the proposal, and now I'm going to cut myself short. So I just have thought about it a lot since then. Some devotees say, well, I was attracted by the philosophy or the prasadam or this or that, but really my decision to join Krishna consciousness was that I wanted to be a part of Swamiji's group. I wanted to be a part of his society, and I felt myself a part of that group and that family, and this is you. I feel a part of you. This is the thing that I joined Krishna consciousness for. It's because of my association with you. Thank you very much.
My roommate from college, he came. I was living on 6th Street, and he came to tell me that we used to go to Ramakrishna, all these yoga places together, and he said, oh, I just went to a very Swami, but very unusual. They were singing and dancing. We were into meditation, singing and dancing. And he said, yeah, and he has a big tape recorder. It was a tape recorder, you know. Because we refused to wear a wristwatch because we didn't want to know what time it was. So it was mundane time. So but he said Allen Ginsberg was there. So he was our hero. So I said, oh, I have to go. So then I came here, I walked over, and I came here and sat right back there at the door. And I remember Prabhupada coming in, the door opened, and Prabhupada came in. And as he came in, he was to get up on the platform, but instead he just stopped, and he turned, and he looked right at me. And I'll never forget that. It's like burnt into my memory that, all right, Dayananda is saying hello, okay. So, anyway, Prabhupada once asked me, he said, how did you join? So, I told Prabhupada the story. This is a very important question. How did you join? I mean, even Prabhupada was interested to know how we joined. He asked me once, this is many years later, he said, how did you join?
Maybe it was just you.
No. So I told him, my friend, yeah, I guess so. He said, I told him that my friend told me about you, you know, and I came, but he didn't join. And Prabhupada said, oh, same with me. And then he told the story how his friend, I think Narendranath Mullik, you know, brought him to Bhakti Siddhanta, but then he did not join. Prabhupada joined. So then Prabhupada told that story. Very nice.
So Srila Prabhupada, he was still living here in this apartment, and so the devotees were all going to see him at his apartment, and he had these little Radha Krishna deities that he traveled around with, and we were up there one day, and he said, "Is there anybody who would like to? I'd like to have somebody bathe my deities. Is there anyone that would like to do that?" And I just kind of said, "Oh, I will, Srila Prabhupada." You know, I wasn't, Brahmin initiation or anything like that, but that didn't seem to matter at the time. And so, so Srila Prabhupada had me come the next morning, and he came and sat down next to me in front of his deities, and he took Radharani, his little brass Radharani, and he showed me how to polish her. He did it himself. He polished her with that tamarind and Fuller's Earth, I think it was. I can't even remember what it was. I think that's what it was. He did Radharani, and then he took Krishna, and he handed Krishna to me, and he said, "Now you do Krishna." So I polished Krishna, and then he showed me how to bathe the deities, and he asked me to come every morning to do that. So I did that while he was here in New York, and sometimes he was in the room, and other times he'd go out on his morning walk while I was doing that. And then us devotees, we went back to Boston, and Prabhupada came, I can't remember exactly whether it was immediately after New York or a little, it was, he came to Boston, and I took care of his deities there in Boston, and during that time, Satsvarup said to Prabhupada that he was concerned about the women in the temple because they were all fighting with each other a lot. And Prabhupada said, well, they should be married. He said, immediately arrange that they should all get married. And there was four of us women. It was me, Saradia, Rukmini, and Janava. And so this is just to show you how involved Srila Prabhupada was at that time. He was very personally involved with his disciples. So Saradia and Vaikunthanath, I think that was already, they knew they were going to be getting together. Isn't that right, Vaikunthanath? And Prabhupada had some brahmacharis come down from Montreal, and Janava got fixed up with Nandakishore and Rukmini and Bharadwaj. And then Prabhupada said that I should marry this young man named Dayal Natai. And I didn't want to marry him. I went through this whole, I don't know, he didn't seem right, somehow or other. I didn't feel right about it. And I was very upset because Srila Prabhupada said this is what should happen. You should marry him. And I was like going up on this hill and praying to Krishna and crying. And I was really freaked out about it. And Satsvarup told Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, well, nothing is by force in Krishna consciousness. And if she doesn't want to get married now, then she can get married at some later date. So then everybody got married except for me. And the whole temple changed all of a sudden. It was just this small temple in Boston, and everybody was married. And then there was one brahmachari, Devananda, who had been there. He was still there. Otherwise, it was all couples and me. So then I started feeling really out of place, and I was praying to Krishna, send me a husband. So Prabhupada left, and he went on his travels, and he ended up eventually in Columbus, Ohio, and I think it was maybe about 2 months later. I've kind of lost track of the exact time, but anyhow, Purushottam, Prabhupada's servant, called up one day the Boston Temple, and he said, Prabhupada wants to know if you want to come here and marry Pradyumna. And I said, okay. And so I went off and got to Columbus. I just met Pradyumna once before. And then when I got there, it had turned out that Prabhupada's deities had been lost, and while he was traveling, somehow the deities had got lost and had gone missing for a number of weeks. And on the day that I arrived in Columbus, the deities came back too. And so Prabhupada said to me, the deities like the way you serve them, so they have come back. Now that you are here, they have come back also. So I got to bathe his deities again, and I'll stop there.
But one time at a disappearance festival of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada was explaining how the disciple tries to carry out the order of his guru and the previous Param Guru, the grandfather guru and the previous acharyas. And then he gave us an example that how Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur had begged door to door to build the first temple at Mayapur Dham, and how the different acharyas had contributed to development of Mayapur Dham, how Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur had constructed the Yoga Pit birthplace temple for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and developed the Dham. And so Prabhupada said, and so to please my spiritual master and the previous acharyas, so I'm trying to do something also here in Mayapur Dham. And then he said, and I'm very grateful to everyone who is helping me. And then he couldn't speak any further, just like he choked up and he started crying. And there was a long silence. We didn't know what to do, and Prabhupada said, the secret of success is to please, to satisfy the desires of the previous acharyas.
And we bow down to his lotus feet so that he preached all over the world this Krishna consciousness, and he would be stimulating us, inspiring us. He inspired me before also. I told just few minutes before also that he inspired me while I was there in Kashmir preaching. So I wrote him, Maharaj, this Kashmir is full with Muslims. I am preaching over here. Then he wrote me in reply, oh Mangal Liloy, you are afraid of preaching there amongst the Muslims. I am preaching amongst the
Religious.
Yes, so in that way, yes, in that way he wrote me that so don't be disheartened. You preach all over there to whom you will see, you will be preaching. So mlechas, yes, they call it mlechas. So anyway, he wrote me. So that letter also there in your letterheads. So it is a great privilege to me, to you all, along with our Prabhupada, Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, his followers. I bow down to lotus feet that you will be following. Don't be emotional, don't be blind, but be very strictly, very sincerely following Prabhupada. You will be reaching Gaudiya Math, actual principles of Gaudiya Math, and he will be entering into the realm of the Lord Radha Krishna and having his service by Harinam Sankirtan. Again, I thank you all. Thank you very much.
So he would take Charnamrita and then he would pay his obeisances to Radha and Krishna and then go to Lord Jagannath. So somehow I always managed to be right there when he would get to the Charnamrita bowl. So I was there one day and I was standing right behind Prabhupada and he took the Charnamrita and he looked straight at me with this very heavy look in his eyes, and my heart stopped. And he had this horrible look on his face, and he just looked at his hand, and he looked back at me and he said, "It is solved." And then he looked around at all the devotees and said, "It is solved." And I was just like, I was frozen, like my heart would stop beating, And Prabhupada was very upset. Then he, paid his obeisance and he sat down, and then he immediately said, "Who has done this? Who has done this?" So there was some poor little brahmacharini, I can't even remember her name. She came, she was in the kitchen, she came in, and she was just shaking, in her sorry. And Prabhupada said, "Why have you done this?" And she just giggled and said, "Well, Krishna's mercy." "It is not Krishna's mercy, it is your stupidity. Why you did not check?" So then there was, of course that's, then now there's a sweet one, that at that time, Gaur-Nitai, we just had small Gaur-Nitai, then this big Gaur-Nitai deities came that Govindadasi made in Hawaii, and it was the installation day. And Prabhupada was personally doing the installation. He went in, and so everybody was in the temple room, and I thought, well, if we're installing deities, there should be a feast. So I missed the whole thing. I was in the kitchen. I sat there and I just cooked everything I could think of, rasgullas and sandesh and halava and so many things, and puris, and made this whole feast because I figured there must be, if we're installing deities, there should be a feast. So I missed out, everybody was there because Prabhupada was doing it personally, so I missed the whole installation. I was hearing it over the microphone. So finally, the fire sacrifice, everything happened, and then they offered the prasadam. Then Nandu Kumar came in, he was Prabhupada's servant that time. So he saw that there was a big feast there, so he loaded up Prabhupada's plate with all the Mahaprasad. Then he went upstairs, and he told me when he came back downstairs, he said, Prabhupada looked at this plate, and he said, "This is breakfast?" He said, "No, this is breakhead." Then he said Prabhupada usually would just take a little bit of the sweets, just take a little something of one thing and something of another thing. He said that day, Prabhupada tasted the rasgulla and sandesh that I had made, and he ate every single one of them, just bing, 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 bing. And then he smiled at Nandu Kumar. He said, "Sweets means rasgul and sandesh." Then I knew my whole life was perfect. That was the only time I ever got to cook for Prabhupada in my life. And even by accident, I cooked for him.
In 1972, Srila Prabhupada came to Honolulu to install our deities, Sri Sri Panchatattva, and to give sannyas initiation to one of his disciples, Siddha Swarup, who became Siddha Swarupananda Goswami. And he was there for 10 days or something. It was rather a long stay. And every day he would come, and whenever he came to the temple, he would comment on how beautiful the tulsi trees were. This at the time was my life's work. I started taking care of tulsi at the beginning of 1970, the first tulsi trees in ISKCON. And he would make comments to Govindadasi about how pleased he was that we had these big tulsi trees. We had a bunch of them growing out front, and then we had them lining the sidewalk as you came in, walked up to the temple. Every day he'd make these comments, and sometimes a little joking. He would tell us that the tulsis were crowding the sidewalk a little bit, and he would say, "Oh, actually it is an offense to brush against tulsi." And another time he said, "It is an offense to step on her shadow." So the next night the brahmacharis were trying to leap over the shadows, which was kind of hard because we had a street lamp across the street that cast shadow across the whole sidewalk. And so one night he teased, he said, "Actually it is an offense to step over her shadow." And I said, "Well, what do we do?" Prabhupada just laughed and said, "Don't live, don't die." So every day Govindadasi would give me these reports about how pleased Srila Prabhupada was. She'd convey these stories. So I got a little impatient since I'd been doing all this work for 2.5 years. So one night I just said, "Look, Govindadasi, I wouldn't mind hearing some of this stuff firsthand." Gaurasundar was a little protective of Srila Prabhupada whenever he was in Hawaii. We weren't allowed to get very close. So Govindadasi grabbed me by the arm, dragged me out to the car. We had an old Buick, I think, that Gaurasundar had bought for this visit. And he was sitting in the driver's seat, Prabhupada and the passengers in the front. And Govindadasi shoved me in the back and said, "Prabhupada, this is Babaru. He does all the work for Tulsi Devi." And Prabhupada gave me a great big smile and said, "That is very nice." And then he said, "We should always engage our body and our mind in Krishna's service." And I knew at that minute that to him, anyway, I was transparent.
So when Prabhupada entered the airport, I got very close. There was a big red carpet and devotees on either side. And I wanted to get real close so I could see where he was at. So when I got close, my first impression was that he was very short, and that his feet didn't really touch the ground, and that I couldn't really understand who he was. And that made me very embarrassed because I thought I was very spiritually enlightened. And when I looked at Prabhupada, I could understand that if he were to look at me, he could understand me a lot better than I could understand myself. So they guided Srila Prabhupada and placed him on a very large Vyasasan. One side someone was fanning with a whisk, and one side a shamra. Somebody was washing the feet, somebody was offering an artik, all at the same time. And I remember devotees were laughing, they were chanting, they were singing, they were crying all at the same time. And I was embarrassed that Srila Prabhupada should look at me, because I thought, if he will look at me, he'll see what an idiot I am and how puffed up I am. So there was this, in the VIP area, there was the devotees had made this semicircle, and there was a couch, like a big couch, some distance away. So I thought, well, if I get behind this couch, I can look at Prabhupada, and he won't be able to see me. So I got behind the couch, and I was looking over, just this much. And of course, it made it very obvious, the fact that I was crouched down behind this couch, you can imagine looking out at an ocean of people and you see there's one head short and everybody's very tall. So I was hiding behind this couch, hoping not to be seen by Prabhupada, and he was looking at all the devotees from England and Paris and Spain and all these places, looking and identifying all his different disciples. But he kept noticing there was this peculiar thing happening behind the couch. And I can imagine, as a public speaker, if you're looking out, you think, well, maybe there's a bomb, somebody with a bomb, or somebody who's going to, it could be very suspicious that somebody's crouched behind a couch. So anyway, Prabhupada kept looking. The fact that I was crouched down, it meant that he was looking, and then he would look back at me, and then he would look again, and then he kept coming back, and it made me more obvious, although I was trying to hide myself. And every time Srila Prabhupada looked at me, I had a physical experience that my heart broke. It was like a burst of, I don't know what it was, but I felt absolutely humiliated by his glance. And I started to cry, and I'm sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, oceans and buckets of tears. And at the end of about 10 minutes, I felt so purified. I felt so clean and so rejuvenated. And it was my first experience of the glory of being humiliated by a pure devotee.
I remember one time a disciple of Prabhupada went to his room in Vrindavan. I won't mention his name, he's a nice devotee, but he was a GBC man at that time, and his hair had grown out a little bit, to cover myself, I'll say a little longer than mine is right now. And when he walked into Prabhupada's room in Vrindavan, Prabhupada immediately said, he said, the hippie seeds are sprouting again.
In Geneva, another big famous person came to see Prabhupada, a Sanskrit scholar named Jean Herbert, and he had written a book about Krishna and called, the dust raised by the hooves of the cows refers to this, and the gopis are symbolic of that, and of course everything for him was Mayavad and without any real substance. And Srila Prabhupada said, I have been looking at your book. And the man looked at him, big Sanskrit, he was big Sanskrit scholar. And it took me 12 years to write that book. Prabhupada said, yes, and there are still mistakes in it. And he said, you have described things here, but the proof of whether one has truly understood Krishna is like these young boys and girls. This is the age for enjoying, but they have given this up to perform devotional service. Herbert starts chuckling away. I smoke, I drink, I could give these things up if I want to, but I don't want to. Sri Prabhupada says, yes, therefore you have many, many births to go on the spiritual path. And he said, well, it's time to go now, and he left. But before he left, Srila Prabhupada presented him with a copy of Nectar of Devotion and said, I will request you to please look through this book. I think you will find it of great interest. And afterwards, whenever these things would happen, the devotees would all gather around Prabhupada for the after-game wrap-up, We wanted to make sure that we had really understood this was a really big demon, Let's get the nectar here. And Prabhupada was very quiet about it. So one of us jumped in. It was myself, Satsvarup Maharaj, Hansaduta was there, Guru Gauranga. And I think Guru Gauranga might have been the one who said, he was a big demon, wasn't he, Prabhupada? Well, I said, well, he has been influenced by association with Mayavadis. But I've noticed in his book he has said the name Krishna many times. This will greatly benefit him. So compassionate, and so kind, so concerned, even for this Mayavadi scholar who had been doing so much damage through his writing. And the next person to see Srila Prabhupada was a very humble man. He came in, Srila Prabhupada looked at him, perhaps anticipating some more debate. And Prabhupada said, do you have any questions? And the man said, no, I was just very happy to hear that you were coming to Geneva, and I was honored by an opportunity to come and meet you personally. Srila Prabhupada thought for a second and said, Yogeshwara, bring my harmonium. Satsvarup, you play kartals. Hansaduta, play mridanga. Hari, Hari, Bifale. Had a bhajan for a few minutes. The man stood up, thanked Srila Prabhupada, and left. Srila Prabhupada looked at us and said, he was a very simple soul. Therefore I sang for him, because I knew he would appreciate it. He had this wonderful facility for reciprocating with people just according to their needs and disposition. And I think the wonderful thing
one of the many wonderful things that I recall about Srila Prabhupada was when I was with him, it was always this wonderful, inspiring example of someone in every moment, every situation of every day, giving Krishna, giving Krishna, giving Krishna. And that kind of a memory is a sacred trust to us. We pass it along to you as the inheritance that we have from Srila Prabhupada, our gift to you. And please derive as much inspiration and satisfaction from this as we have. And thank you all for being here. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
This man was, Prabhupada asked for any questions. And the man stood up, and he was a professor from Caltech, which is the big, school over here, Pasadena, I think. And he said that, Swamiji, that you're talking about kirtan, but this is just a sentimental, like Dr. Stahl, same presentation. This is all just sentiment, and it's not the real Vedantic understanding. And he quoted a few verses from Vedanta Sutra, and was quite proud of himself. And he was standing. And while he was rambling on, Prabhupada didn't even look at him. Prabhupada was just looking at Lord Jagannath, chanting with his hand, and he reminded me of a lion just getting ready to pounce. And Prabhupada was just didn't even look at him. Prabhupada was just chanting like this. And the man finished, and then Prabhupada turned and said, "Are you finished?" And you could just tell, they'd paired off, they'd squared off. And then Prabhupada said, in this Purana and in this Upanishad, and Prabhupada just was quoting again. It was just like watching somebody with a sledgehammer hammer somebody into the ground. Because the guy was standing quite proud of himself. And then you watched him, he kind of became a little deflated. And then he was like on his knees. And then he was sitting down, and then Prabhupada finished in a crescendo. And he made his last point. And then Prabhupada said, "Do you have any other question?" And the man said, "Can we have kirtan?" So it's like Dr. Stahl, same thing.
It was about 1972 or 3, actually, I don't remember. I was allowed to go into Prabhupada's quarters before they sent us out on a traveling party. And of course I was in great awe, because Prabhupada was so much more relaxed in his quarters even than when he would give a Bhagavatam class. It was a different mood. And I was watching him take his Ayurvedic medicine, and everything was so elegant and graceful, and I was like completely in awe. And then one devotee said, "Prabhupada, they are going out on the subways every day, and even before they make an announcement, people are giving a donation." And Prabhupada said, I said, "Oh," he said, "that is love." He said, just like a little boy, he brings his shoes to his father without being asked. And Prabhupada, just an amazing look of compassion when he said, "So therefore you should tell them that they are suffering because they have forgotten to bring their love to Krishna." And I went out, and the next time I had the opportunity to go on the trains, I actually said that, and I was getting the largest collection of anybody in the temple at that time. So Prabhupada's words were very... And then on that same occasion, Bali Mardan Prabhu asked Prabhupada, I said, "Prabhupada, so they are saying they're from Apple Records, is that okay?" And Prabhupada pretended not to hear. He said, or at least externally didn't hear, and he said, "Do not sell records," he said, "sell books." And for no Prabhupada, they are saying they are from Apple Records, and they are selling books. And then Prabhupada laughed, and he said, just like Rupa Goswami said, he said, "First make them Krishna conscious, then give them the rules and regulations. Somehow or other," he said, "get them to take a book and to utter the word Krishna."
There was a lecture going on. Prabhupada spoke on the 4 classes of men, the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. And this was in front of a university crowd, a rowdy crowd of students, particularly in Sweden, where nothing is holy and nothing is sacred. And so as soon as Prabhupada finished, a student stood up right in front and said, "Of course you think you're a first-class man." Prabhupada lectured first class, second class, third class man, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya. You're thinking you're a first-class man sitting in a sea of followers covered with flowers, sitting on a high exalted seat. You think you're first class. And I was boiling, just about to pounce on the Prabhupada. If he would have made just a little sign, I would have just ripped this man. into shreds. Well, anyway, coming from Germany, we are very expert to deal with these matters. So, in any way, I was just ready. My blood was boiling. But it was dead silent in the room. Nobody spoke a word. You know, you could hear a pin falling on the ground. And then Prabhupada said, he was pleading with the man, practically speaking. He said, no, no, no. He said, like this with his hands. He said, no, no, no. I'm not a first-class man. He said, I'm a fifth-class man. And so everybody was shocked. It was dead silent for a little while. And then Prabhupada said, in this deafening silence, he said, because I'm the servant of everyone. And we were just astounded when he said this. And I saw behind us, his lip was quivering, you know. He was deeply, when he spoke it, he knew it was true, that he was a servant of the whole world. And so 2 big tears came behind his spectacles. And that I saw, because I was right there. How he cried when he said this. And it was so clear that he was really the servant of the whole world, that he didn't think much of himself, like we have heard before. And he was so humble, that he had so much Shakti on one side, and on the other side, that he was so humble that he considered himself, in fact, fifth class, the servant of everyone, the person who was supporting everybody, serving everybody, giving to everybody, and not expecting anything in return. I thought it was such a sublime display of such a pure devotee of Krishna. It was very moving, and I will never be able to forget it.
Once having a darshan with Prabhupada on Henry Street, and it was interesting. Prajumna had brought a teaching assistant from Columbia University to see Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada asked him what he teaches, and he said he teaches religion. Prabhupada said, I've heard him do this several times to people, what is religion? And the man said, well, religion is a search after the divine. And Prabhupada said, yes, that's very good, but there must also be finding. And then there was the most incredible discussion, because Prabhupada began asking him questions. This doesn't show up in the Conversations book, although part of this was published in BTG. And my memory is not well enough to remember exactly what Prabhupada did, but he would ask him a question, and he would say, do you agree or do you disagree? And the guy would say, well, that's true. Then Prabhupada asked the next question, and then say, do you agree or disagree? So then I could see what Prabhupada was doing, you know, that if he just kept on that way, he was going to have to surrender. And it was amazing when I saw Prabhupada was doing it. It was incredible. And the guy figured it out one step, before the final step. He figured out what was happening. And Prabhupada asked him a question, said, do you agree or do you disagree? And he was silent, and he said, well, I think it's very nice. And Prabhupada laughed, and he said, well, partial agreement is better than none. And then he just changed the subject and went on to something else with some reporters. There were a bunch of reporters there and so they started asking questions, and the reporter said to him, do you consider yourself the savior of the youth of America? And Prabhupada's eyes got very big, and he said, yes. And he said, but this is not just future, it is already fact. He said, just see, here are my students. Just see how they are bright-faced. And of course, everybody just lit up, He said, formerly they were known as morose because they were hippies, and now everyone knows them as bright-faced. So it is already done. Now your government is trying so hard to stop this drug thing. They should give me money.
if they just give me money, because we just have no facility, if they just give me money, then I'll be able to. That was his appeal. It was an amazing way he did things.
Before I was his servant, I had so much opportunity. I'm in Los Angeles on a daily basis. We would go into his garden, and I got to read Krishna book to him. Every evening I got to read Krishna book. And Prabhupada was just so happy, listening to these pastimes. And as the days went by, I would try to see which stories he liked, so, this was my own speculations. And I saw he enjoyed so much hearing about the pastimes of Krishna killing the demons. So one night I went in, this happened because when David Gorilla was urinating on the sacrifice, and I was reading, and Prabhupada was laughing. He was having so much fun listening to this pastime. So the next day I went in and I was looking through the book to find, an appropriate pastime of Krishna that Prabhupada would enjoy and perhaps laugh. I could get some emotion. And he saw me looking through, and he said, anywhere. He said, Krishna is like a sweet ball. Wherever you bite, it's sweet. So just read, he said. So then I went and immediately started reading.
One of the things that struck me about Srila Prabhupada is that he was always very, very concerned about the welfare of all of his disciples. And that never struck me harder or deeper than in a particular pastime that I had with him in Bombay. I had cut my foot, and I came to the Guru Puja that morning, and there must have been 100 devotees there at the Guru Puja, and everyone was worshiping Prabhupada and offering incense. And the arti was going on, and he saw me come in, and he saw my foot, and he called me to the Vyasasana, and he moved forward, and he just completely ignored everyone in the entire room for that one moment. And he said to me, "What happened to your foot?" And I said, "Well, I cut myself." He said, "Are you all right? Is it very bad? Have you gone to the doctor? Do you need medicine? Do you need anything?" And I kept assuring him that everything was fine, that I had taken care of it. And then he said, "Remember, if you need anything, if you need any care, come and see me and I'll take care of it." So there was that deep care and affection that Srila Prabhupada displayed. Nothing was important to him as the care and welfare of his disciples.
One other time, we were getting ready for Radhastami, and it was the first Radhastami at Berry Place. And there was a big pot of Radha Red. Everybody knows that. It's a famous chutney. And the pot was very big. It was on the floor. And my daughter ran into the kitchen, and she couldn't stop, and she fell into this chutney. But it wasn't so funny because it was just off the stove. It was hot. So some of the devotees were really upset because from their point of view, we couldn't offer the chutney, so this pot of chutney was like destroyed. And Prabhupada heard about it and he immediately called me and said, "Take her to the doctor," because she'd actually she to this day has scars from the chutney. But Prabhupada was immediately concerned and immediately practical. The devotee, we were kind of like, well, what do we do about the chutney? But Prabhupada was, what do we do about the child?
I remember another time, Srila Prabhupada, he was in France, and we had this beautiful, gorgeous temple in Germany. It was a headquarters, the Rettershof, but in the aftermath of the previous GBC, who caused a lot of trouble in Germany and later left. Germany was kind of in shambles. There was some trouble we had with the government. This is well known in the movement. And so it was Jai Tirtha who went to Srila Prabhupada, and he thought that we were not be able to maintain this temple. It would have been better to split up in smaller centers. But Prabhupada always liked this temple. When he came there, he appreciated the deities were there, and it was a brilliant location actually in the middle of Germany. And when he heard it, he said to him, "Even if your child has been born deaf and blind, doesn't mean you kill it." And we were kind of shocked that he said that. And he became very angry. He said, "Doesn't mean you kill it." And Jai Tirtha said, No. Prabhupada said, "Don't become Rolling Stone." He said, "Become determined."
another time, another relevant point, which is sort of, I hope, adding up to present a picture. One time we were walking with Prabhupada in Waikiki in Hawaii, and I think Guru Kripa said to Prabhupada that Prabhupada had won our heart, or we had, because Prabhupada's personality was so attractive, we couldn't help but love him. And Prabhupada smiled and said, yes, that was my trick.
About a few years ago, it was the 700th birthday of Madhvacharya. So there was a big celebration at his birthplace, a place called Panchaka Kshetra near Udupi. And all of the big acharyas and gurus of the Madhva Sampradaya were assembled. In South India, they're considered the most strict and authorized Vaishnavas. I think in 700 years, not a single of their sannyasis have ever fallen down. They're very strict, and they're very learned scholars. So the biggest, most famous, and most influential of all of the acharyas, his name is Pejawar Matswami, Vishweshtirtha. And there was a raised platform, and all of these acharyas were there, and there were thousands and thousands and thousands of their disciples and people who were gathered. And when he spoke, he first spoke the glories of Madhvacharya, and then he began to glorify Prabhupada. He said that Madhvacharya's teachings never left the shores of India until His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada took them to the whole world. He said he has taken the pure teachings of the Bhagavad and the Bhagavad Gita to every continent, practically every city in the entire planet Earth. And he has not in any way compromised the purest teachings of Sanatana Dharma. And he went on, and he concluded by saying, and he pointed to all the other Madhva acharyas on the stage, he said, all of us put together, if we are all made into one person, he said, we do not equal one grain of dust at the lotus feet of even a single one of Prabhupada's disciples who are spreading this message all over the world.
I think another significant experience was when I went to India. I was sent to Vrindavan about a year and a half after I joined. And there was a surge of sannyas hype. Everybody was taking sannyas around 1975, 1976. And I remember Gargamuni, after he took sannyas, he came to Germany and he was pointing around at my husband, who was 29 or something, and we'd been married for a year and a half. He said, oh, and you're too old, you should take sannyas immediately. So then I was shipped off to India to assist Hemavati, whose husband took sannyas very shortly after. I didn't know anything about, I was so new in the movement, I didn't know what it means, all this. So anyway, I know Prabhupada came, and he wanted, Hansaduta said, yes, I'm determined I should take sannyas here at the Mayapur festival. And Prabhupada said, you cannot take sannyas unless your wife agrees. So he had this meeting, he called Hemavati to him, and he said, now you have to agree, the wife must agree, the husband should take sannyas. And so Hemavati would say, but I don't agree that my husband and we are advanced enough to take sannyas. So, but she said, if you give my husband sannyas, Srila Prabhupada, I will accept it. So Prabhupada said, no, you have to agree. You cannot just, I cannot do it. You must agree. No, Srila Prabhupada, I don't agree that my husband is advanced, I are advanced enough. No, but I accept. If you give him sannyas, I will just accept it. So this went on and on for 4 days. They were back and forth discussing, and she never agreed. And still, 1976 in the Mayapur festival, although there was no arrangement, in the sannyas arena, Hansaduta jumped in, and he was all with his dyed clothes, and he was all ready, and Prabhupada gave him sannyas. So then I was back in Vrindavan waiting with Hemavati, and we had no idea that he was doing this, and she had no idea that he took sannyas. So anyway, the devotees all trickled back from Mayapur to Vrindavan, and as insensitive as we can be, they said, hey, you know what happened at the Mayapur festival? Your husband took sannyas. And she was absolutely hysterical. Hemavati was absolutely astonished because she had not agreed, and it was just not expected. So anyway, she was in a rage, and she went to Srila Prabhupada when he came after the Mayapur festival, and she stormed in his room and she said, "You know, Srila Prabhupada, now that my husband has taken sannyas, I hate everyone, and I hate everything in this material world." So Prabhupada was silent for a few minutes. And after that, he said, "Oh, very good. Now you are making advancement."
Prabhupada rang his bell from his desk, and his servant came in. This is just an example of the strength of Prabhupada's mood. So the servant was supposed to do something that they had neglected to do. I can't remember what that something was. And Prabhupada's mood shifted just drastically from this very sharing with the devotees happily about the art and appreciating their service, and he became very, very strong with this. What was going on, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a whole background to neglect or something. Prabhupada was so strong. The devotee came in, paid obeisances, reported something. Prabhupada was so firm with him. And the mood of everybody in the room became so silent in response to Prabhupada's mood. And as soon as he left, Prabhupada withdrew that anger and was again perfectly under control. Not that the anger controlled him, but he was instructing his disciple with the use of that mood to stay properly situated in his devotion. And one other thing, just a little cultural point. As Prabhupada writes, he also does. Any situation that I was ever in with Prabhupada where persons would come for darshan or something, without fail there was always some arrangement for prasadam distribution. Even if it was something very simple. Sometimes cut fruit, sometimes macadamia nuts. He would have his servant stay in the door, and I remember Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj describing the same thing in another time. But Prabhupada was so conscious of little things, cultural points, that as Western devotees, if we have the right philosophy but the wrong behavior, we still feel justified. But Prabhupada was teaching in every respect about the culture of Krishna consciousness also.
Shortly after I joined the Krishna consciousness movement in 1968, I joined just after Rath Yatra of 68, and Srila Prabhupada came into town in San Francisco. I was quickly transferred up to Seattle to build an altar and Vyasasan and things like that for Prabhupada up there. And in due time, Srila Prabhupada came up. This was in the fall or almost winter of 1968. So during that time, we had a little temple. It was a little cottage, a little house. And it was full of the devotees from Los Angeles with the Sankirtan party, etc. And when Srila Prabhupada came there, we wanted to have a nice audience. And very few people came. As a matter of fact, really nobody came. So one time, there's some students from the University of Washington that came, a whole bunch of them. And we were so delighted because there's around 20 of them and they'd all come in at the same time. And Prabhupada was giving a lecture and we were feeling so good about this lecture and how nicely it was going on. And so Prabhupada is speaking and we thought they were looking, interestedly at Srila Prabhupada. And all of a sudden, Srila Prabhupada stopped in the middle of the lecture and he said, "Please do not try to misunderstand. Misunderstanding is already there." We were thunderstruck. That same time, I believe it was his Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disappearance day, and he was describing at how he had been going on and on for many, many years. His spiritual master had told him to spread Krishna consciousness in the Western world. In a sense, it was only a few words that had been given. Just, you should go and spread Krishna consciousness in the Western world, in the English language. And many, many years had passed. And Srila Prabhupada had, of course, been making plans to raise money through pharmaceuticals, etc., to do this, and then his pharmacy burned down. But at some point, he said he began to see his spiritual master in dreams, and his spiritual master was saying, "This time to go." And he was thinking, he said, he was looking around, there was probably about 10 or 15 of us in the room at the time. He was looking around the room, And he said, I was thinking how I can leave my children. And like that, I have my 4 children, how I can leave them and do this. And then he looked out, and it seemed as though tears shot from his eyes. And he looked around us, his eyes were shining, and he said, but now, he said, I have got so many children. And from the way he said it, it gave almost the impression that the whole world had gathered inside that tiny little room in Seattle. And that we could envision, somehow there was never any question but that there would be a huge world movement. And yet, at that time, I think there were probably less than 70 devotees in the entire movement.
When we finally got to 72, Prabhupada invited everyone to come for the Ananta-session inauguration. I have some beautiful pictures. I'm trying to find a time to show them to everyone. But when Prabhupada went and he dug this 12-foot hole and we put Ananta-session there and he invited all of the godbrothers to the Gaudiya Math, you know what he invited? He said, for the pleasure of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, let us all cooperate together, form a governing body, unite. This is what will please him. Let us unite and preach together. And everyone was amazed. Here Prabhupada already created 40 temples. He's inviting everyone, let's work together. And you think, this is really Krishna conscious. I mean, this Prabhupada has shown the way. His desire, total cooperation to please the Guru. But then nobody accepted. In my young years, I could never really understand. Later, I started to realize that maybe there were different attachments people had. But Prabhupada's vision was always so universal. And he said, well, okay, if they don't want to work, but we will do it. And he established a governing body, and he established Guru Parampara and everything within ISKCON. And he said, I'm doing everything simply as an offering to please my spiritual master. So there may always be detractors, but I am simply trying to do this to please the previous acharyas. So in ISKCON, we are simply dedicating ourselves to serve Srila Prabhupada's vision. And there are many people who may not be able to understand that, but we see that by doing that, actually, we get all the success. We owe everything to Srila Prabhupada.
Prabhupada came into the LA airport, and this was we all went there, it was a huge kirtan, we were all waiting for Prabhupada to come in, and finally Prabhupada came in, and everybody, we were just jumping up and down, waiting for Prabhupada, we were jumping up and down, as soon as, and so there was one sweeper there, this big black sweeper, was mopping the floor, so he saw this commotion, everybody jumping up and down, having this big kirtan. So he came over to see what was going on, and Prabhupada came through the door. Everybody hit the ground. So when everyone hit the ground, he saw Prabhupada, and he just started saying, look at that man, he's shining, he's shining. Look at that man, he's shining, he's shining. Look at that man, he's shining. If you couldn't understand, I'll translate that from Southern English into California. He's shining, look at that man, he's shining.
I was sitting on a bench near that hippie hill in San Francisco, and I was chanting my rounds, and a very old black man came by. He went up to me and said, that old man who started this thing, he was a cool cat. He said, I was living in the Bowery, and he was living in a house, it was a complete mess. He said, then again, Jesus was born in a barn. And then he walked away.
So at one point early on, Prabhupada got sick. He had a stroke, I guess. And he was recuperating. So we heard that if he spoke too much, he would get tired and it would influence his health. So everybody was concerned. So I wrote one letter to him asking him not to speak so much because we were concerned for his health. I didn't want him to get tired, and so I was concerned that way. Well, he wrote back a letter to me maybe there was some other questions in it, but at one point he said, "My dear boy, if I would not speak, how would you come?" So he was emphasizing that this was his mission, was to speak and preach, and how ridiculous of some 18-year-old boy who didn't know very much to try to instruct him that way. So he said, "My boy, my dear boy," and I felt it through the letter. It was quite obvious. But then he lightened the blow. He said, "But I'm taking help and precaution with from Gaurasundar and Govindadasi." So he sort of lightened the blow that he was being careful. He was being careful, but he didn't need to take advice from me.
And then Prabhupada came again in 1976, and by that time we had a few more devotees. There was just many things happened, but there was this one time when it was summertime. Actually, Prabhupada was there for Lord Balaram's appearance day, and around that time, and it was very hot in Iran, and it was also very. All the flowers were blooming, and it was a very nice atmosphere. Hare Krishna. And so Prabhupada at one point, he called it Bhuswarga, it's heaven on earth. He liked it very much. And one night, he would go out on the balcony, and he would sit, and the devotees would sit out with him, or when we had guests, the guests would sit with him. And one night he was out there, and in Iran, it's a Muslim country, it's a Shiite country, so they have what's called namaz, which is prayers, a call to prayer 3 times a day, actually at Gayatri times. So, but they have over the loudspeakers a kind of a chant that's calling everybody to prayer. It's very beautiful. And so Prabhupada was sitting on the balcony, and this namaz was going on. And he listened to it, and then he turned to Atreya and he asked, "What is this?" And Prabhupada says, "This is namaz, and it's the Muslim call to pray to God. And they're saying the names of God, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, different in the name of God, who's the most merciful, most compassionate, things like that." And so Prabhupada said, "That's very good, are calling everyone to prayer." And Atreya said, "But Prabhupada, isn't it better that we pray in the names of Krishna rather than Allah?" And Prabhupada turned to him and he said, "You're asking me to be sectarian."
And I remember Prabhupada was reading one time, they were looking at the newspaper, on the front page was the moonshot, and whatever their line was, one great step for man, one great step for mankind, it had the big hype on the front. So Prabhupada looked at that cursorily, and then he turned a couple pages in the newspaper, somebody gave him Prabhupada the newspaper. Prabhupada went to about the 5th or 6th page, and then he said, "This is their real business." And there was a small article that said, taxes going up, defense dollars to pay for a moonshot. So Prabhupada said, this is a ploy just to milk the people. So Prabhupada did that.
Prabhupada was always extremely humble. As exalted and as glorious as he was, he never acted in such a way that people, unlike other gurus who said they were God, or other gurus who said they were something wonderful or something special, Srila Prabhupada always acted in a very humble manner. There was a dispute one time about Srila Prabhupada's position between different senior devotees. And one woman disciple wrote to Srila Prabhupada and said, "Some of the devotees are saying that you can see what's in the hearts of all of your disciples and in every temple. And the other devotees are saying that that's like a magic trick and that you're not like that. You can't do those things." So the devotees who are saying that The other devotees are saying that that's diminishing your spiritual prowess. So what do you say? Please tell me. So the secretary asked the question, and Prabhupada said, for a greatly advanced pure devotee, this is not at all difficult. He can easily see what is going on in the hearts of all of his disciples and in all of his temples. So that was the secretary would ask the question, Prabhupada would reply. So then he said, okay, so I should tell her that you can do this then. And Prabhupada said, I didn't say that. He said, I said for a greatly advanced pure devotee. He could see that. I am not a greatly advanced pure devotee. I am not even a devotee. I am just trying to be a devotee. So in that statement, he simultaneously exhibited his humility and actually also showed us what our state of consciousness should be in trying to develop our Krishna consciousness, that we were just trying to be devotees. So then the secretary said, so I should tell her that. And he said, oh yes, for a greatly advanced pure devotee, this is not a difficult thing.
I remember another time we were walking with Srila Prabhupada in Paris, and it was under the Eiffel Tower. I think it was Shivananda. He went to Srila Prabhupada when he stopped doing the japa walk, and he said to Srila Prabhupada, what about your internal life, Srila Prabhupada? And Prabhupada immediately, he was very strong. He said, that you do not require. And so, I think it was Shivananda, he asked again, but Srila Prabhupada would like to know, what about your internal life? Prabhupada became very furious. He said, that you do not require. And he turned away and walked on, disgusted. And so we could understand that these things, what is going on between the pure devotee and with Krishna, they're very personal and they're very private, and they're not meant for public display. The sentiments and the exchange between Krishna and his pure devotee on the Raga Nuga platform, they are not subject to discussion or to attendance of evening classes. They are very personal, very private, very precious. And Srila Prabhupada thought that what he expressed later also, first, what was it? First, deserve, then desire. That we were like fools trying to enter in something which was very dear to him.
Under the shade of a jackfruit tree, about 100 years ago, in a little house near Calcutta, a most unlikely place I know. But was there that Mahaprabhu would spread his nama far and wide. Siddhanta Saraswati did preach there and reside. A most important day it was in the sorry, sad world of men, where millions had been killed in wars, been killed and born again, been born again to suffer in the sea of pain and strife. A most important day it was, the dawn of new life. Under the boughs of a jackfruit tree about 100 years ago, in a little house near Calcutta, a most unlikely place I know. But it was from there that history would spread our ISKCON far and wide. A boy was born at quiet morn with Krishna on his side. It was he who brought the Krishna bhakti to the West, to the Western world, which was of true religion quite divest. Receive this sacred knowledge of the soul and God from him. Oh, Srila Prabhupada, you filled our hearts with nectar to the brim. Under the boughs of a jackfruit tree about 100 years ago, in a little house near Calcutta, where the Ganges waves did flow, the day after Krishna's birthday, he came forth from his mother's womb, the factual Messiah who could save us all from doom. Now, our cup of life was empty, and our future hope was dark and dim. Come Prabhupada to save us. Bow to him. Bow to him. Everybody. Under the boughs of a jackfruit tree about 100 years ago, in a little house near Calcutta, a most unlikely place I know, but it was there that Mahaprabhu would spread his Nama far and wide. Siddhanta Saraswati did preach there and reside. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
This took place in the airport. Prabhupada had come in, and we'd all come up and greet him, and there was a big press conference and right there in the passenger lounge. We'd have a Vyasas on and all this stuff. And I remember that day they asked Prabhupada, "Why have you come to America?" And he said, "I've come to give you a brain." He said, "Your society is headless." He always liked to provoke reporters, actually. So then when the whole thing was, the press conference was over, then the long concourse, and Prabhupada was walking back, and we were all kind of strung out behind him down the concourse. And so I was falling about 12, 15 feet behind. And then I could see coming at us this weird sight, which was a television reporter running, and linked to him by some wires was a guy with a minicam on his shoulder. Now in those days the minicams were not so mini; they were pretty big. So these guys are coming like this, with this huge camera, come running up toward us. And so they came up to Prabhupada. Prabhupada stopped, and so I ended up standing right next to Prabhupada. So one guy's trying to get his face together, and the other guy's unwinding the wires and everything. The Prabhupada just sitting there watching it, and finally he takes a microphone, and he sticks it into Prabhupada's face, and he says, he's like this, how does your group differ from other Buddhists? And then Prabhupada was so cool. He looked at him without a moment's hesitation. He said, "We have nothing to do with this Hinduism or Buddhism. We are teaching the truth, and if you are truthful, you will accept it." And the guy was just speechless. He was utterly speechless. And I just want to point out there was two things going on in that conversation. One is, which always happened with reporters, the reporter is playing his little role as a reporter, and you're supposed to play the little role as an interviewee. And Prabhupada didn't buy into that structure at all. He was talking to this jiva, about his life and the meaning of it. That was one thing that got him. Then the other thing he did, when Prabhupada answered like that, you see, because sometimes I'm afraid we in ISKCON we'll say, well, actually, we're Hindus of the Gaudiya tradition and something like that. That isn't what Prabhupada did. What his answer did was destroy the mental platform on which the question was asked, and get the guy right down to the real truth. And so when I think of Prabhupada's teaching and how he taught, this instance always stays in my mind as an exemplar of how we should be and how we should preach and what we should do, and Prabhupada managed to do it in just a few words like that. So we always have to keep these things in mind. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Once during Guru Puja in Bombay, where the devotees took their turn offering flowers and paying obeisances, I decided just then, before my turn was up, to act very so-called humble. So when I appeared before His Divine Grace, circling my flowers around Him as is normally done, I loudly within my mind declared to myself to be a fool number one, a rascal, and not deserving to be there that instance. I deliberately avoided eye contact with Srila Prabhupada. I paid my dhanavats and walked around again to take my spot. One of the devotees elbowed me, telling me, "Did you see that?" I said, "See what?" Srila Prabhupada gave me a gigantic smile. When I heard that, I became very embarrassed, understanding that Srila Prabhupada actually had read my mind. Even though I had lacked complete seriousness, he still accepted the offering.
One time in Venice Beach, and we had just finished our walk, and we'd come back to the parking lot at Venice Beach, and Prabhupada would always lead us in a foot stamping moment, exercise. Prabhupada would always go, and he would stamp his feet to get the sand off his shoes, and so we would all stamp our feet. So just as we were all stamping our feet, some large dogs came. They looked sort of like small horses, like really big dogs. And I remember Brahmananda was there, other physically large devotees were there, and everyone was bewildered. No one knew what to do because these dogs were very large. It looked like they could just literally swallow you limb by limb. So while we were all bewildered looking at each other, it was Prabhupada that stepped forward, fearlessly laughing, and chased the dogs away with his cane. So Prabhupada was fearless. He knew how to deal with every living being. Another time, a poignant moment, I was with Prabhupada again in New Vrindavan in 1972, and he was on his mat taking massage outside. He would take open-air massage every day, taking advantage of the nice climate. And somehow or other, I don't know from where they came, but there were a few kittens who were playing near Prabhupada, and they were wrestling with each other and rolling around, little kittens played. And as they were wrestling and rolling, they actually rolled right onto Prabhupada's lap. And so I, of course, have been brought up in the hard-nosed, take no prisoners, brahmachari school, where dogs and cats were sort of the enemy. They were hopelessly polluted and so on. And we hadn't even read yet the Chaitanya Charitamrita about Shivananda Sen and the dog. So I thought, oh my God, these embodiments of pollution have rolled onto Prabhupada's lap. But Prabhupada was actually very kind, and he began to pet the cats, the little kittens, and he was actually very affectionate. And then he looked up at me and said, "Look," he said, "even here there is love." And then I understood that our original love for Krishna becomes perverted, as we know, in the form of material lust and all kinds of material desires. But then when Prabhupada saw these little kittens affectionately embraced and rolling around, he could see, even within these kittens, their original love for Krishna. So he said, even here there is love. And then he made another statement which I've always remembered, and I think is very, very important for any devotee that has responsibility, either as a so-called leader, as a mother, as a father, and so on. Prabhupada said, because the kittens were just lying there very innocently in Prabhupada's lap, and he was petting them. And Prabhupada then said, if I put my head on your lap and you cut my throat, that is the greatest sin. If I put my head on your lap and you cut my throat, that is the greatest sin. In other words, if someone has any kind of responsibility where another innocent person takes shelter, and the person with that it doesn't matter what responsibility it may be, if we exploit that person or abuse that person, Prabhupada said that is the greatest sin.
Maybe it was a day or two later after that, we was ready for our departure. And we went again to the apartment with Srila Prabhupada, and we were begging his permission to leave, requesting his blessings. We were allowed to touch his feet with our heads. And he put his hands on our heads. And then he put his arms out, and he asked me to give him the child. So he took Saraswati and he held her. He was sitting on a low asan, and he had a big garland on. And he held her by its chest with her both faces facing forward. And he took his garland, and while it was still on himself, and encircled Saraswati at the same time. And then he smiled largely, and he said, "And now they will say, what kind of sannyas is he?" He was, of course, referring to his godbrothers. He had just spoken to us about how his godbrothers had been sent to London, and they could not get anything done. And now he said, the sannyasis, they have gone, I am sending grihastras. So he was laughing, and then he asked for her.
I was guarding his quarters in Mayapur, and I had the late shift. I believe it was 10 o'clock. Gopavrinda Prabhu had given me. And I guess I was really passionate Radha Damodar Brahmachari. And, anyway, whether I merited it or not, I wanted to be noticed by Prabhupada. And so at this particular point, Prabhupada went out to go to the restroom. So here was my chance. I ran down the corridor, and I waited outside the bathroom like this, with a stick in my hand, for Prabhupada to come out. And Prabhupada walked out, and he looked, and he goes, "What is this?" He goes, "What is this you are guarding?" And I said, "Yes, Prabhupada." And he looked up like this, and he said, "What is he guarding?" Just like that. And that was it. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Another story, I was in Montreal Temple. It was 1975. And we were going to go to the Mayapur festival at the opening of the Krishna Balaram Temple. And before we left for India, I came back to Los Angeles to visit my family, my parents. And my parents were very favorable to Krishna consciousness. My mother and my father had been here at the temple visiting. My mother had made garlands for Srila Prabhupada and helped cook. So when I was leaving to go back to Montreal, they knew I was going to go to India, and my mother was saying, "Is there anything I can give to your spiritual master? I'd like to send something along with you." And I said, "Well, whatever you want." So she said, "Well, I made some guava jam," because she had guava trees. "Do you think he would like that?" And I said, "I'm sure he would." So I took it with me to India, and I was in Vrindavan, and I went up to Srila Prabhupada's door to give to his servant at the time, and he's going, "Oh, come on in and give it to him yourself." I'm going, "No, I didn't want to." And so I gave it to the servant to give to him. And the servant found me later and told me that Srila Prabhupada was so appreciative of it. And he actually Srila Prabhupada wrote my mother a letter, and it was so sweet. Just that little service, and he appreciated it so much. Wrote, quite a long letter to my mother about how much he appreciated it, and talked about me, your daughter is so nicely engaged in devotional service, and she's happy, and she's being well cared for, and it was really sweet. And my mother appreciated that very much. And I just want to tag on the end here is, my mother left her body just recently, and it's like, who can know the potency of mercy of Srila Prabhupada? Because I just pray that I have just a fraction of the mercy that she had when she left her body. I was with her for a couple of weeks leading up to her death, and I sat by her bedside and read Bhagavad Gita to her every day. She had on headphones with Prabhupada chanting japa. Just moments before she passed, she was listening to the Krishna meditation tape, the days and moments, and I was right there when she left her body. And it's really amazing, and I just see it's all Srila Prabhupada's mercy, that little bit of service and that appreciation for a pure devotee. Thank you.
So when I moved in the temple, we gradually started doing a little theater, and I hadn't met Srila Prabhupada yet. And then it was time for him to come. And we prepared a play of Krishna kidnapping Rukmini, where I played the part of Rukmini, and my husband Loitaksha was playing Krishna, and we had been helping to direct some of the plays in a more so-called professional manner. And all of a sudden, when it came time for the performance, we were up in the little prasada room in the temple, in the old Brooklyn temple. And I remember the curtain opened, and there was a big empty space about to where you are. And then there was Prabhupada in his rocking chair, and then everyone else was behind him. And the play opened with Rukmini sitting on the stage writing a letter to Krishna. And all of a sudden I got so nervous. After all my years of doing theater, I thought, Prabhupada, oh my God, how I can do this? It felt like going to auditions and so forth. This was way beyond that. I thought, here's Prabhupada, the spiritual master of the universe, and I'm performing Rukmini, me. I thought, he's just going to see that this is ridiculous, and then... And my knee started shaking. I could just feel my knee, and I tried to press it into the floor, and then all of a sudden, I just kind of took a deep breath, and Prabhupada's presence just really calmed me down instead of making me nervous. It was just kind of the opposite. And we had a wonderful performance, Jai Rukmini Dwarkadish. And I remember there was one point towards the end of the play where I think it was Balaram cutting off the Sika of Shishupal. And all the devotees were laughing. And Prabhupada stopped and he said, "Why are you laughing? This isn't funny." And so Prabhupada would train us in so many ways of what was funny and what wasn't funny. But anyway, the play was over, and Mohanananda was his servant at the time, and he came running up a little while afterwards. We were all downstairs taking our makeup off, and told us all the things that Prabhupada said about the performance, and that he said, "This is better than reading my books, and I want to take this whole troupe with me to Africa." He wanted to take the whole acting troupe to Africa, but of course that was impossible because that was the main event at the Brooklyn Temple at the Sunday feast, so we couldn't just leave. But just the fact that he said that and the importance that he put into theatrical performance and the cultural movement, being he wanted it to really be presented as a cultural movement. And actually in the Bhagavatam he said, all my disciples should act in plays. Because when you play the part of any of these characters, you get a different feeling of what it's all about. It becomes more real. And we tend to kind of avoid our feelings a little bit because we get so caught up in the process and forget about our own personal feelings. And when you actually perform a part, you have to use your feelings to portray the character. And then because the character is there, you sort of transform for that moment or for that period of performance. And Prabhupada made a very nice compliment to me. He said, "She was the best, Rukmini, she was the best." And I always thought, oh my God. And then another time, a very ecstatic performance was in Mayapur, at the Mayapur Festival, and actually I think it was in 1977. And Prabhupada was very sick, and he wasn't even coming down to give lectures, but he would come down to the play and then go back up to his room. And we were doing a portion of the Ramayana, and I was playing Shurpanaka. And I remember we got some trees on the stage to create a forest effect. And I remember just coming up the stairs in the back, and Prabhupada started clapping like this, and he started laughing. And then the part where, the exchange between Shurpanaka and Lord Ramachandra and Lakshman, and he was laughing so hard, he was slapping his legs like this with both hands. And when I looked out just for one moment, and all the devotees were watching him, and he was the only one that was watching the play. And he was laughing so hard, then he stood up and gave a standing ovation. It was just so ecstatic. And the amazing thing is Prabhupada was like performing, there was no judgment. He was like a child. When he would watch the plays, you felt no inhibition, all the inhibitions would just go away. And the amazement of his personality in all his activities. Being a child, being a wise, saintly personality, the combination was amazing.
One Mataji came in and asked Prabhupada if he was present in his pictures. And Prabhupada said, yes, therefore my disciples commit so many offenses.
At the airport, most of the devotees stayed outside the terminal and kept a kirtan going on the sidewalk. And a few of us were in sitting with Srila Prabhupada, who was up on the seats. We were down on the floor. And Satsarupa Maharaj was reading newspaper clippings from around the world about the movement and about Srila Prabhupada. And all of a sudden Srila Prabhupada stopped and said, I hear that Aniruddha is here in Hawaii, but he has not come to see me. And Aniruddha had been there for some time, staying aloof from the temple, perhaps not doing so well. But he had actually come to the airport that day to see Srila Prabhupada off, but he hung way back in the back of the crowd. So the devotees, at Srila Prabhupada's insistence, after some trouble, convinced Aniruddha to come inside. He was feeling a little shy, apparently. He came in with cutoffs and a t-shirt and a little stud in his ear, offered his pranams to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada looked at him and said, so, Aniruddha, how are you? And Aniruddha smiled sheepishly and said, actually, Prabhupada, not so good. And then Prabhupada signaled to Aniruddha to sit next to him on the seats. The rest of us were all on the floor, and Aniruddha said, no, I can't do that. And Prabhupada said, no, there is no problem. There's no difficulty. You can sit down. So they sat and talked, small talk, for a few minutes. I don't even remember what they were talking about, just exchanging pleasantries. And then Srila Prabhupada looked at us and he said, in Los Angeles temple, he is the beginning. And it was real clear that what was important to Srila Prabhupada was not what this particular, or any particular devotee's temporary situation might have been, but what was more important was that he had rendered some important service and that Srila Prabhupada really appreciated it. Kind of a revolution in my mind.
One thing I know as his servant, I tried to avoid very much and stayed out of the politics at that time. I was very young, 19, 20 years old, and I didn't understand it that much, and I was clear of it. And I think I was saved from a lot, and I always was able to appreciate Srila Prabhupada very much through my personal service with him, and I don't want to waste any time here not saying anything. Anyway, today is very special, of course. It's funny, and within this country, it's Father's Day. And Srila Prabhupada was very much my father. Hare Krishna.
Separation. Well, there's no separation. As I speak this, now I know that separation doth the strength of love's connection show. Now, one who feels no separation did no connection get. And one who feels deep separation has firm connection yet. Now, separation does not mean to make a show of tears, to make one's to make one's sorrow prominent, just to win beginners' cheers. Separation means to feel deep within your heart that I depend on Prabhupada and nothing shall us part. Now, we all depend on Prabhupada, from neophyte to master. And one who puts aside his grace is heading for disaster. He is the first, he is the last, the Acharya and the founder. No one worked so hard as he, or kept a standard sounder. to end of time, he will be known as ISKCON's suckling mother. His books, the nourishment of us all. Where comes such another? So as we're struggling forward, we should hang upon his grace. Brother, side of brother, both in our humble place. And as we are expanding, no one should forget the heavy dues we owe to him. Unrepayable the debt. And then, if we're honest, we'll know for sure he's here. And we will always feel secure and free from fear. But if we think that now he's gone, we'll struggle on our own. Dread, fear, and death surround. Hey, what can you do alone? A little karma? A little charisma? Yeah, it will all be finished in the end. Punamasika Bhava. Again become a mouse, to ignominy condemned. Do not think there's aught in you that Prabhupada does not lend. Know this truth. Depend on him, and you'll see him once again. Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare